Does anyone still remember this when it comes to Polkadot? Nothing I say is financial advice. However, not too long ago, I saw a post, and this was back in September, by the way, but it was talking about how, again, Kusama, its Canary network, at least according to something called ChainSpec, at that time was considered number one in the world in terms of the aspect of decentralization. Now, people may be thinking, okay, who's really going to care about this? But sometimes my reaction is this. As sort of quickly as I saw, the sentiment change in not such a positive way when it comes to Polkadot, we've seen what happens if things move in the opposite direction other than that back in 2021, right? However, here's the thing. Dot, around 2 months ago, so we're talking about back in October again, right? A new all-time low that it reached. So we're talking about even lower than where it was before we saw what happened during that altcoin season in 2021, which I find pretty surprising because to me, what I've noticed is that when it comes to something like Polkadot, with the fundamentals that it has, also with DOT, arguably, at least from what I can see, over 1 million holders, and around 2 months ago, it reached kind of basically the lowest point it's ever been able to reach historically in terms of its existence. Not to mention as well, we're not that far off from that all-time low as of right now. DOT currently around like $1.80, right? The all-time low when it comes to DOT was around $1.40. So we're not talking about like it's, had this hypothetical okay recovery. It hasn't really been that okay, actually. But at the same time, in a make-believe scenario, I take a look at, again, DOT's all-time low at around $1.40, right? If for whatever reason, I take a look at that as like a floor, what do I think is farther away, the floor or the ceiling? Because DOT currently is around 27 times lower than $50, right? And again, it's around $1.80, which the all-time low is around $1.40. So the way you take a look at it is the distance to the floor greater or in the opposite direction, let's say the hypothetical ceiling. To me, it wouldn't surprise me if the distance to the floor felt like a little bit closer to me as opposed to the opposite direction, because kind of my reaction is that sometimes when I take a look at, let's say, just in a make-believe scenario, I take a look at a level. If something is like at a level 1, a 0 is pretty close at that point. But if let's say the maximum level is like 10, 1 is very far from 10. You know what I mean? But it's kind of close to 0. This is my perspective. I'll never be able to know how low something could go, ever. I'll just never be able to know that because I can never control anything when it comes to this space. I'm just one individual. I can't do anything when it comes to this. However, kind of my reaction is I'll never be able to know, but at least sometimes I take a look at, like, is it closer to a hypothetical floor or a ceiling? That's just kind of my reaction, right? Because I'll never be able to know the exact, like, point, but sometimes it just feels like a little bit sort of closer in some instances as opposed to the other. It's like, for instance, right? Let's say I want to put this watch on, right? And I'm trying to like figure out how to do this with the strap. Like, if I'm not looking at it, I'm not going to be able to know exactly how much I have to like pull. I mean, again, I have to take a look at that, right? But then there's that feeling, you know what I mean? I just kind of feel like, oh, I already put a lot of it as opposed to not. I can kind of feel that. I'm not going to be able to know exactly if I don't look at it, but it's just kind of like the feeling. It's just kind of the mentality that I have when it comes to this space. So basically, with Polkadot 2.0, I take a look at also the aspects of EVM compatibility when it comes to Polkadot. I take a look at all that, and Polkadot's trying to connect blockchains together, right? It's focused on interoperability. Again, with all that going on, DOT was lower than where it was back in 2021, just around 2 months ago. DOT back in 2021 at one point reached over $50, right? Slightly, it was around $53. But then again, before it did that, it had never at least from the chart that I could see, reached around $1.40, but we saw that just around 2 months ago. So if, let's say hypothetically, in my perspective, if I'm able to believe in a project at levels in which I have not seen ever, basically, right? And also levels that are even lower than before that 2021 altcoin season, if my hypothetical intent is to dollar cost average, I don't know if this would be such a major complaint in my perspective, because again, if let's say in a random make-believe scenario, I'm able to dollar cost average into something and it's lower, I don't know if I would necessarily, again, find that to be a major complaint for me. Totally different example. If I go to Costco and I see something having a discount and I actually like it, I don't know why I would be complaining. I wouldn't be like, oh wow, I can't believe it. That would not be my reaction, right? That's not gonna be the way I react. My reaction would be like, oh really? I'm like, okay. I mean, again, I'm not telling anyone to do anything, but kind of my perspective is that I like Polkadot to begin with anyways. So if let's say, sure, it's not doing the best, and then arguably I think it's fundamentally better than where it was years ago, back in 2021. This is just my perspective. It's not doing better in terms of the hypothetical price, but in terms of fundamentals, arguably I would think that it became more dynamic compared to back then. To me, I have not given up when it comes to Polkadot. This is purely just my perspective though. I mean, who knows what could really happen when it comes to it, but when I take a look at the charts and when I take a look at Polkadot's fundamentals, I just don't have this feeling of wanting to give up. But this is just my perspective. Even though, again, I'm not telling anyone to do anything, but I still remember Polkadot and I'm just still waiting, and that's pretty much about it.